The worst mistakes are the ones that reveal feelings you have been hiding for years. My hand was still gripping the front of Mason Reed's jacket when I realized what I had just done. The noisy hallway outside the championship debate auditorium fell completely silent inside my head, even though students, judges, and faculty members continued rushing past us. My pulse pounded so loudly I could barely hear my own breathing. Logan Hayes stood only 20 feet away, frozen beside the trophy display with absolute disbelief written across his face. I had imagined 1,000 different ways my life could fall apart, but none of them looked like this. Mason did not step away. He did not laugh. He did not ask whether I had completely lost my mind. Instead, he held my gaze with those impossibly calm blue eyes that always irritated me during debates because they never seemed to panic, even when everyone else did. A slow breath escaped him before he quietly asked, "Was that for him? Or was any part of it for me?" Every answer I had rehearsed for years disappeared. I could argue constitutional law in front of 500 strangers without stumbling over a sentence, yet standing a few inches away from the one person I had spent 2 years calling my rival left me completely speechless. Behind us, someone announced that finalists needed to report backstage in 2 minutes. The words barely registered. Logan still had not moved. His expression shifted from confusion to something I had never seen before, almost as though he had just watched an ending he never expected. Mason finally released the sleeve of my blazer that he had instinctively caught when I stumbled toward him. Neither of us looked away. For one impossible moment, the entire hallway seemed suspended between everything we had been and everything we were about to become. Then the memory crashed over me like a wave, pulling me backward to the beginning of the disaster 3 days earlier. 3 days before I accidentally kissed the last person I ever imagined kissing. I believed my biggest problem was finding the courage to ask Logan to a concert downtown. 2 tickets rested safely inside the notebook tucked beneath my arm, purchased with money I had been saving from my campus job for almost a month. I had planned every detail. After the debate team welcome party, I would ask Logan to walk with me along the Charles River, hand him the envelope, and finally tell him that somewhere between freshman orientation and late-night study sessions, friendship had quietly become something much deeper for me. Chloe kept insisting I was building castles out of wishful thinking. "Jamie," she told me that morning while stealing half my breakfast in the student cafe, "being someone's favorite friend does not always mean you are becoming their favorite person." I laughed because admitting she might be right felt more terrifying than pretending she was wrong. Logan had always treated me differently from everyone else. He remembered my coffee order without asking. He saved me a seat before every practice. He texted me whenever it snowed because he knew I hated walking across campus alone in bad weather. I convinced myself those little things had to mean something. Hope has a strange way of turning ordinary kindness into secret promises that never actually existed. As I left the cafe, the envelope holding the concert tickets slipped halfway out of my notebook without me noticing. Before it could fall to the sidewalk, another hand caught it first. I looked up and found Mason standing directly in front of me with the tickets between his fingers. "Careful," he said evenly. "Looks expensive." I snatched them back a little too quickly. "Do not worry about things that are not yours." A faint smile crossed his face, impossible to interpret. I was not worried about the tickets. Then he walked away, leaving me wondering why, for the first time since we met, his words felt less like a challenge and more like a warning. The rest of that morning passed in a blur of classrooms, debate notes, and unanswered questions, but my mind refused to stay focused on any of them. Every time I opened my notebook, the 2 concert tickets peeked out from between the pages like tiny reminders that I had already built an entire future around a conversation that had not even happened yet. By lunchtime, the debate team gathered in the student union to finalize preparations for the welcome party that would take place on the rooftop that evening. Logan dropped into the empty chair beside me with the same effortless smile that had managed to keep my ridiculous hope alive for almost 2 years. "You are coming tonight, right?" he asked while stealing a few fries from my tray without bothering to ask first. "You know I cannot survive one of these events without you." My heart reacted before my brain did. It always had. I would not miss it, I answered, trying to sound much calmer than I actually felt. Logan thanked me with an easy grin before launching into a story about one of his photography electives, completely unaware that every ordinary conversation only made me care about him more. Across the room, Mason sat with several members of the varsity debate team reviewing case files for the upcoming state championship. Even from the opposite side of the cafeteria, he somehow looked composed enough to belong in a courtroom instead of a crowded dining hall. Once or twice, I caught him glancing in our direction before returning to his notes without saying a word. "Your favorite rival is watching you again," Chloe whispered as she slid into the seat across from me. I rolled my eyes. "He is probably making a list of reasons I will lose next week." Chloe shook her head. "No, Jamie. People who want to beat you do not look at you like that." I laughed because the idea sounded completely impossible. Mason Reed and I had spent 2 years arguing over everything from constitutional interpretation to the correct way to organize evidence binders. If there was one person on campus who seemed genuinely impossible to understand, it was him. By late afternoon, the rooftop had been transformed with string lights, soft music, and long tables overlooking the Boston skyline. The September air carried just enough coolness to make everyone reach for light jackets, while the setting sun painted the glass buildings across the river in shades of gold and orange. I slipped the envelope holding the concert tickets into the inside pocket of my blazer and reminded myself that tonight would finally change. Everything. Chloe squeezed my shoulder before disappearing into the crowd. "Just tell him the truth," she said. "Whatever happens, at least you will stop wondering." I nodded, although my confidence lasted only until Logan walked toward me carrying 2 cups of hot chocolate. He handed one to me exactly the way he always did, adding 2 marshmallows because he remembered I hated drinking it plain. "I have something exciting to tell everyone," he said with a smile that seemed brighter than usual. "Just wait until everybody gets here." My stomach tightened for reasons I could not explain. Around us, laughter echoed beneath the hanging lights as more students arrived. Conversations blended together, and music floated across the rooftop. I searched the crowd and unexpectedly found Mason standing alone near the railing, his attention fixed on the city for a moment before his eyes shifted toward me. Our gazes met briefly, and for the first time I did not see competition in his expression. I saw concern. Before I could understand why, Logan tapped a glass with a spoon to gather everyone's attention, lifted the microphone waiting beside the speakers, and smiled in a way that made my carefully planned evening begin to unravel before he had spoken a single word. The applause came easily after Logan tapped the microphone, the kind of warm applause people give before they even know what they are celebrating. I stood near the edge of the rooftop with my cup of hot chocolate slowly cooling in my hands, convinced that whatever Logan wanted to announce had nothing to do with me. He thanked everyone for making the debate team feel like a family before smiling toward the entrance. "There is someone I want all of you to meet," he said. Every conversation faded into silence as students turned their heads. A young man with a camera hanging around his neck walked onto the rooftop, smiling shyly as Logan crossed the room to meet him. Logan wrapped an arm comfortably around his shoulders before looking back at the crowd with unmistakable happiness. "This is Evan," he said. "He is my boyfriend." The world did not stop. The city lights still shimmered beyond the rooftop. Music continued, playing softly through the speakers. Someone nearby laughed before realizing everyone else had gone quiet. Yet inside me, everything collapsed without making a sound. I kept smiling because that was what friends were supposed to do. My hands even remembered how to clap along with everyone else. Logan caught my eye almost immediately and grinned with the same familiar warmth that had convinced me for 2 years that maybe, just maybe, I had not imagined the way he looked at me. "Jamie," he called excitedly, waving me over. My legs carried me across the rooftop before my heart could protest. "I told Evan all about you," Logan said proudly. "You are basically the reason I survived freshman year." Evan reached out to shake my hand with genuine kindness. "It is really nice to finally meet you. Logan says you know him better than anyone." I managed a smile that felt painfully fragile. "He gives me too much credit." Logan laughed and nudged my shoulder exactly the way he always did. "Actually, I need your help again." My chest tightened. For one impossible second, I wondered whether this somehow meant everything was still not what it looked like. Then Logan continued speaking without noticing the hope that had briefly returned to my face. "I want to buy something special for Evan after the championship this weekend. You always know what people actually like. Will you help me pick the perfect gift?" The words landed more heavily than any argument I had ever lost. I nodded automatically because saying no had never been an option when it came to Logan. "Of course," I answered softly. Anything you need. Around us, the conversations restarted, music became louder again, and everyone drifted back into comfortable groups. I slipped one hand into the pocket of my blazer and felt the envelope holding the concert tickets. The paper crumpled beneath my fingers before I even realized I was squeezing it. I did not notice someone watching until I looked across the rooftop and found Mason standing near the railing. He was not looking at Logan. He was not looking at Evan. He was looking directly at my hand hidden inside my pocket. Our eyes met for only a second, but it was enough for him to understand what no one else had seen. He slowly looked away, giving me the quiet dignity of pretending he had noticed nothing at all. I wanted fresh air. I wanted silence. Most of all, I wanted a place where I did not have to smile anymore. Without telling anyone, I slipped through the service door leading toward the stairwell, believing the crowded party would never notice one person quietly disappearing into the night. The stairwell door closed behind me with a soft metallic click, and for the first time that evening I allowed the smile to disappear from my face. The music from the rooftop became little more than a distant echo drifting through the concrete walls while I slowly lowered myself onto the middle step. The envelope inside my blazer felt heavier than it should have. I pulled it out and stared at the 2 concert tickets I had guarded for weeks. Just that morning they had represented courage, possibility, and every hopeful conversation I had imagined. Now they looked like souvenirs from a future that had never existed. I laughed once under my breath, although nothing about the sound felt happy. Nice timing, I whispered to myself. 2 years too late. I rubbed a hand across my face, trying to convince myself that what hurt most was simply losing a fantasy. Logan had never promised me anything. He had never lied to me. Every expectation had been my own creation. That realization should have made the disappointment easier to carry, yet somehow it only made the loneliness feel heavier. I heard the stairwell door open above me and instinctively assumed Chloe had come looking for me. I am fine, I called without lifting my head. You can go back upstairs. No answer came. Instead, slow footsteps echoed down the stairs before stopping one step above mine. I looked up and immediately wished I had not. Mason stood there with both hands tucked into the pockets of his jacket, his expression calm, thoughtful, and completely free of the smug satisfaction I would have expected from the person who usually challenged every argument I made. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, he sat down one step above me, leaving enough space that I did not feel trapped, but close enough that I knew he had not arrived by accident. You picked a terrible hiding place, he said quietly. Everyone checks the rooftop first. I let out a tired sigh. Then why are you here? He glanced toward the closed door before answering. Because everyone else is congratulating Logan. He paused for only a moment. I was looking for you. His words caught me completely off guard. I stared at him, searching for the joke that never came. Why? I asked. So you could tell me I should have seen it coming? Mason slowly shook his head. Jamie, I came because you stopped pretending the second you walked through that door. I looked away before he could see how close I was to losing control again. You do not know anything about this. No, he admitted. I do not know everything. His voice remained steady and surprisingly gentle. But I know what it looks like when someone is trying very hard not to fall apart in front of other people. The words settled over the silence between us. My fingers tightened around the folded concert tickets until the edges bent even further. Mason noticed the movement, but did not ask what I was holding. Instead, he rested his forearms on his knees and looked toward the narrow window overlooking the city lights. You do not have to explain anything tonight, he said. Just do one thing for me. I frowned slightly. What? He nodded toward the envelope in my hands. Stop crushing those tickets. Whatever they were meant for, they are not the reason you are hurting. I stared at him in disbelief. Out of everyone at that party, the one person I had spent years calling my rival was somehow the only person who had seen straight through the lie I had been telling with my smile. For several long seconds, neither of us spoke. The quiet inside the stairwell felt strangely comforting, as though the thick concrete walls had decided to keep the rest of the world outside until I was ready to face it again. I loosened my grip on the envelope just enough for the wrinkled edges of the concert tickets to flatten slightly. Mason noticed the movement, but said nothing. He had always been the kind of person who filled debates with confident arguments. Yet tonight he seemed to understand that silence could sometimes say more than perfect words. I let out a slow breath and stared at the narrow window overlooking the Boston skyline. "You must think I am pathetic," I said quietly. "Spending 2 years hoping for something that was never real." Mason shook his head almost immediately. "No." His answer came so quickly that it sounded as though he had never considered any other response. "Believing someone might choose you is never pathetic." I looked at him with a tired smile. "It feels that way right now." He rested his hands together, thinking for a moment before speaking again. "You are grieving in expectation, Jamie. That does not make you weak. It makes you honest." I had expected advice. I had expected sarcasm. I had expected another competition over who understood life better. Instead, every sentence he spoke made it harder to remember why I had spent 2 years calling him my rival. The silence returned for a moment until I quietly admitted the truth I had been hiding from everyone, including myself. I bought these tickets because I was finally going to tell Logan how I felt. I carefully opened the envelope and looked down at the 2 untouched tickets resting inside. I even planned where we would walk after the concert. My voice almost broke on the last word, but I forced myself to keep going. I kept waiting for the perfect moment. I thought if I was patient long enough, something would change. Mason lowered his eyes toward the tickets without reaching for them. Sometimes waiting feels safer than risking disappointment. He paused before looking back at me. "Until disappointment arrives anyway." I gave a quiet laugh because he had somehow described the last 2 years of my life in a single sentence. My phone suddenly lit up inside my pocket. Logan's name appeared across the screen with a new message asking where I had disappeared to because everyone was looking for me. I stared at the notification without opening it. Mason noticed, but made no comment. Instead, he calmly reached over, turned the phone face down on the step beside me, and withdrew his hand immediately. "He can wait. 5 minutes," he said. "Right now you should stop letting someone who is not in this stairwell decide how this moment ends." I looked at him in surprise. No one had ever spoken to me that way before. Not harshly, not possessively, simply with quiet certainty that I deserved more than chasing someone else's attention. "You make it sound easy," I whispered. Mason smiled faintly for the first time that evening. "It is not easy." His eyes drifted toward the small window where the city lights shimmered beyond the glass. "Trust me, loving someone who cannot see what is right in front of them never is." The sentence lingered between us long after he finished speaking. Something about the way he said it felt deeply personal, almost as though he had not been talking about me alone. Before I could ask what he meant, the stairwell door opened again upstairs and voices echoed through the building announcing an emergency meeting for every member of the debate team. Neither of us moved immediately. For the first time since leaving the rooftop, I realized I no longer felt completely alone. The announcement echoed through the stairwell a second time, asking every debate team member to report to the conference room immediately. I slipped the envelope back into my blazer, picked up my phone without reading Logan's message, and slowly stood. Mason rose beside me, brushing invisible dust from the sleeve of his dark jacket before opening the heavy door that led back into the brightly lit hallway. For a brief moment, we simply walked side by side without arguing over strategy, without challenging each other's opinions, and without trying to prove who was smarter. The silence between us felt unfamiliar in the best possible way. Students hurried past carrying folders, laptops, and debate binders, completely unaware that my entire view of the evening had quietly shifted inside a forgotten stairwell. When we reached the conference room, Coach Daniels was already waiting beside a projector screen with an expression that immediately told everyone something unexpected had happened. The room settled into silence as he folded his arms and looked around at the team. "I just received a call from the state tournament committee," he announced. "One of our finalist partners was hospitalized this afternoon with a severe case of pneumonia. He will recover, but he obviously cannot compete this weekend." A wave of concern spread across the room before Coach Daniels continued. "That means we need to reorganize our final pairing immediately." My stomach tightened. Everyone knew the state championship was only 3 days away. Months of preparation suddenly depended on a decision none of us had expected. Coach Daniels looked directly at me before turning toward Mason. "Jamie Carter and Mason Reed, congratulations. You two are now our official team." The room erupted into surprised whispers. Someone near the back actually laughed in disbelief. No pairing on campus had a longer history of public disagreements than the two of us. Mason remained perfectly calm, while I stared at the coach as though I had misunderstood every word. "Coach," I finally managed. "We have never agreed on anything for more than 5 minutes." Coach Daniels smiled patiently. "Exactly. You challenge each other. That is why both of you have become better debaters every semester." I looked toward Mason, expecting him to object just as strongly as I wanted to. Instead, he simply nodded once. "I accept." I blinked in surprise. That was fast. He turned toward me with the same composed expression he always wore before difficult competitions. "We have 3 days. Complaining will only waste the first one." Under any other circumstances, his answer would have irritated me immediately. Yet after everything that had happened in the stairwell, I heard something different beneath his calm voice. There was no arrogance in it, only quiet determination. Coach Daniels handed each of us a thick folder containing the championship case materials before dismissing the rest of the team. As students filed out of the room, Logan stopped beside me with an apologetic smile. "Jamie, I have been trying to find you everywhere. Are you okay?" I forced a polite smile that felt much easier than it had an hour earlier. "I will be fine." Logan glanced toward Mason, then back at me. "Looks like you two are partners now. That should be interesting." Before I could answer, Mason stepped beside me and calmly lifted the folder in his hand. "We should start reviewing the case tonight," he said. "The sooner we stop thinking like rivals, the better chance we have of winning." Logan wished us luck before walking away, completely unaware that I watched him leave without the familiar ache pulling me after him. As the hallway grew quieter, I looked at Mason and realized the strangest part of the evening was no longer losing the person I thought I wanted. It was discovering that the person who refused to leave my side had been standing across from me all along. That night the law library remained open until midnight, and by 9 o'clock almost every table had emptied except the one hidden beside the tall windows overlooking the Charles River. Thick casebooks, legal pads, and highlighters covered every inch of the wooden table between Mason and me. Under normal circumstances, we would already be arguing over opening statements or interrupting each other's logic. Instead, an unusual calm settled over the room. Mason read through witness testimony while making neat notes in the margin, and I organized our evidence into color-coded folders, grateful for the quiet because it gave my thoughts somewhere safe to rest. After nearly 20 minutes, Mason closed one file and slid it toward me. "Your cross-examination outline is stronger than mine," he said matter-of-factly. I looked up, convinced I had misheard him. "You are actually admitting that?" He shrugged slightly. "Ignoring a better argument because it belongs to someone else is how people lose championships." I smiled despite myself. "That might be the nicest thing you have ever said to me." A faint smile appeared on his face before disappearing just as quickly. "Do not get used to it." We continued working until my phone vibrated against the tabletop. Logan had sent another message along with a photo of him and Evan walking through downtown Boston beneath strings of cafe lights. "Hope you made it home safely. Thank you again for today." I stared at the picture longer than I should have, feeling the familiar ache begin to return. Before I realized what I was doing, I had already opened the conversation instead of the debate file in front of me. Mason quietly reached across the table, placed one finger on the edge of my phone, and gently pushed it closed without touching my hand. "Jamie," he said softly, "the championship is sitting right here in front of you. Do not let someone who is somewhere else keep stealing your attention." I leaned back in my chair and sighed. "It is harder than it sounds." Mason nodded without judgment. "I know." There was something about the way he answered that made me look at him more carefully. His eyes stayed on the case materials, but his expression had changed almost imperceptibly, as though those two simple words carried years of experience he had never spoken about. I folded my arms across the table. "Have you ever loved someone who did not choose you?" The question escaped before I could stop it. Mason remained silent for several seconds. The only sound in the library came from the distant turning of pages and the soft hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Finally, he looked out the window toward the reflections dancing across the river. "You would be surprised," he said quietly. That was all. No names. No explanation. Just 4 words that somehow felt heavier than an entire confession. I wanted to ask who it was. I wanted to know whether he had ever recovered. Instead, I respected the silence he had given me earlier in the stairwell and let the question rest between us unanswered. We returned to our notes, but everything had changed. I noticed how carefully Mason listened whenever I explained an argument, how he remembered details I had forgotten mentioning weeks earlier, and how naturally he adjusted our strategy to strengthen my strongest points instead of competing against them. Hours passed without a single pointless argument. When the library lights dimmed to signal closing time, we packed our bags together. As we stepped outside into the cool night air, the city felt quieter than usual. Mason held the library door open while I walked through, then fell into step beside me without saying a word. Somewhere during those ordinary hours of studying, the line separating rival from partner had become harder to see, and for reasons I could not yet explain, that realization stayed with me all the way back across campus. The following afternoon, the debate practice rooms buzzed with nervous energy as every finalist prepared for the state championship. Mason and I had already spent nearly 4 hours refining our arguments, and for the first time since becoming teammates, we moved through each section almost effortlessly. He anticipated every question I was about to raise, while I instinctively understood when he wanted me to take the lead. It was unsettling how naturally we had learned to trust each other in less than 24 hours. Coach Daniels watched us from the back of the room with an expression that looked surprisingly satisfied. "That is exactly what I wanted to see," he said after our final practice round. "Neither of you is trying to win alone anymore." His words stayed with me as everyone packed their bags. Winning together. Until recently, I would have laughed at the idea of those words ever describing Mason and me. As the others drifted into the hallway, my phone vibrated once again. Logan had sent another message asking if we could talk before practice ended. I hesitated only briefly before agreeing. 10 minutes later, I found him waiting outside beneath a row of maple trees whose autumn leaves scattered across the brick walkway whenever the wind picked up. He looked unusually uncertain, shifting his backpack higher onto one shoulder before speaking. "Jamie, I have been thinking about yesterday," he began quietly. "I realized I probably hurt you more than I intended." I forced a small smile. "You did not do anything wrong, Logan." He looked at me carefully, almost searching for something hidden behind my answer. "I always wondered if maybe you felt something more than friendship." My heart skipped for reasons that surprised even me. For 2 years I had imagined hearing those words. Now that they had finally arrived, they no longer carried the happiness I thought they would. Logan sighed softly. "I never asked because I was afraid of making things awkward between us." Before I could answer, footsteps echoed. Behind me, Mason emerged from the practice building carrying both of our debate binders. He slowed the moment he noticed Logan standing with me. "I can come back later," he said politely. Logan looked toward him, then back at me. "No, it is fine." An uncomfortable silence settled over the three of us. Logan smiled, but it seemed more thoughtful than confident this time. "Looks like you and Mason have become a pretty good team." I glanced toward Mason, who stood quietly waiting without interrupting. "We are getting there," I answered honestly. Logan nodded once before stepping backward toward the campus walkway. "Good luck this weekend. I know you will do great." He gave me one last smile before turning away. I watched him disappear between the trees, expecting the familiar ache to pull me after him. Instead, my attention shifted almost automatically toward Mason, who was still standing exactly where he had been, holding both debate binders as though leaving had never crossed his mind. He handed mine back without a word, but as our fingers briefly brushed against the cover, I noticed something sticking out from inside one of his legal textbooks. It was an old folded sheet of pale blue stationery. The handwriting on the outside looked strangely familiar. Curiosity tugged at me before I could stop it. Mason quickly noticed where I was looking and instinctively closed the book. The movement lasted less than a second, but it was enough. I recognized the paper immediately. It was the note I had written during freshman year, the one I had planned to give Logan before losing it somewhere on campus. My breath caught as impossible questions rushed through my mind. Why did Mason have it? And how long had he been keeping it? My eyes remained fixed on the folded blue sheet tucked inside Mason's textbook long after Logan disappeared down the campus walkway. My heartbeat grew louder with every passing second until I finally asked the only question that mattered. "Where did you get that?" Mason followed my gaze, and for the first time since I had known him, genuine uncertainty crossed his face. He slowly closed the book, but there was no point pretending I had not seen it. After a long silence, he released a quiet breath and held the textbook against his side. "You recognize it?" It was not a question. I nodded. "I wrote that letter during freshman year." Even saying the words aloud felt unreal. I lost it before I could give it to Logan. Mason lowered his eyes for a brief moment before looking back at me. I know. My chest tightened. You knew? He nodded once. I found it outside the student center the day you dropped it. Every emotion I had spent 2 years burying seemed to rush back at once. Then why did you keep it? My voice rose more than I intended before I forced myself to lower it again. You should have given it back. Mason remained completely still. I should have. Another silence settled between us, heavier than any debate we had ever shared. Finally, he spoke again, his voice quieter than I had ever heard it. I picked it up because I thought it was class notes. When I realized what it was, I knew I should return it immediately. He paused, searching for words that clearly refused to come easily. But I read the first line by accident. I stared at him without speaking. After that, he continued softly. I knew it was written for Logan. My hands tightened around my debate binder. So you kept it for 2 years? Mason gave a faint, almost disappointed smile directed entirely at himself. Every week I told myself I would return it. He looked directly into my eyes. Every week I failed. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to accuse him of invading my privacy or keeping something that never belonged to him. Instead, I found myself asking the question that mattered far more. Why? Mason looked toward the quiet campus path before answering. Because that letter was the first time I realized you could look at someone the way I had already been looking at you. Time seemed to stop. The autumn wind stirred fallen leaves across the brick walkway. Students laughed somewhere in the distance. And yet the entire campus faded into silence around us. I could not find a single word. Mason shook his head gently, as though regretting everything he had just admitted. I never wanted you to know like this. Before I could respond, Coach Daniels called from the entrance of the debate building, reminding us that the championship shuttle would leave in 2 minutes. Mason took one slow step backward, his expression calm despite the vulnerability now resting openly in his eyes. Forget what I said if you need to, he whispered. Right now we have a championship to win. He turned and began walking toward the waiting team without expecting me to follow. I stood frozen, watching the person I had called my rival disappear into the evening, carrying feelings I had never imagined he was hiding. My phone vibrated once more. Logan's name appeared across the screen with a new message asking if we could finally talk after the championship, because there were things he should have said much sooner. I looked at the message for several seconds, then slowly locked my phone without opening it. Ahead of me, Mason reached the shuttle door, but paused before stepping inside, glancing back only once. For the first time in 2 years, I did not run after the person I thought I loved. Instead, I found myself walking toward the one who had quietly been waiting for me all along.